Welcome to another episode of the Burn Desire Show. And today I'm proud and happy to project to, well, it's a terrible introduction. Anyway, I present Alex Epstein here today. Now, we've known each other for some time, both in the same kind of community back from Manchester, and then more notably to the wider universe, with both been on The Apprentice, which is something we'll maybe come on to at some point. But Alex has had kind of, from my point of view, like a very interesting professional background and a personal background, moving countries, etc. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about that and to to draw some kind of lessons, learnings, and inspiration that from your story. So I always like to kind of like go back to my favorite quote. I think I've said this a load of different times, but one of them is from Steve Jobs' commencement speech at Stanford. And if anyone hasn't seen that, it's definitely worth checking out. Have you seen it, Alex, by any chance?
I think I've seen that a long time ago, but you can remind me.
He talks couple different things, but like the quote that sticks out is the one where he says that you cannot connect the dots going forwards, only backwards. So that's why I always like to talk to people on this podcast from like the early days, because where you are now, like it kind of makes sense when you go back to like school. Oh, I was interested in this subject or that subject, which then led to this university and this and that and other. But of course, when you're at the university or different stages, or even now, you don't know where you're going to be in 20 years, but 20 years from now, the story makes kind of sense, right? Or at least we try and make sense of it, which is also part of the fun, I guess, of life, trying to make sense of how you get to where you are. So like kind of, were you like an academic kid back in school? Like, what was you kind of like? You went to King David, right, in Manchester. What sort of academics were you?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I was academic. I was smart at high school. You know, I always excelled. I always got very good grades. I joined King David in like the middle set, and I was moved up to the top set. So I was academic. I sometimes did very well, even despite not doing a lot of preparation, but I was also very unruly and very naughty at the same time. So I was always in trouble. I don't know if I was always on report card. So report card was when you had to report to the headmaster each day, and the teachers had to, you know, leave a message about how you'd behaved in each lesson. So yes, I was sort of academic, but also very naughty and disruptive all at the same time. And I suppose the way I was termed disruptive, it was probably more that I like to talk and contribute. I've always liked to share ideas. So I've never liked the idea of conforming or just sort of like sitting in silence. So yes, I'm the same person now as I was then. You know, I'm still disruptive. I still talk a lot. I still don't work very well with, you know, rigid rules and, you know, bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
So those experiences at school have stayed with me my whole life. And I think it's that personality that's with it, that is within me, that's what got me on The Apprentice. That's what got me my first job. That is something that has characterized all the experiences that I've had. That's been a real consistency in my life.
So when you were at school, did things just come easy to you, or did you work at it, or which of those was true academically?
Sure. I think I was, you know, I was gifted in a way in that, you know, I came into this world, you know, with an aptitude and a certain sort of personality. You know, I suppose that was nature rather than nurture. But I was always a hard worker. I always worked very hard. I wasn't good in that a lot of my friends, they would come home from school, they'd do their homework immediately once they got home. I always did my homework very late at night. You know, I probably started my homework once most of my friends had gone to bed, but I always did it. You know, I always was very, very dedicated, and I did it religiously. I always completed it, even if it meant, you know, staying up, you know, way later than I should. And yes, I think I did work hard. You know, I always strived to probably try and have a better life than my parents had. And I was always very driven by that. I was always driven by this promise of, if I'd always, that had always been coaxed into me from being very young, that if you're dedicated and you work hard, good things can happen.
Without a doubt. And you then went on to the Manchester University Business School. It's the Alliance School, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
And to get into that school, so again, people listening from not from the UK, you choose subjects prior to university that kind of then send you into university. So what subjects do you kind of specialize in? You kind of, was it A levels for you, or what do they call them? Maybe they were A levels, I'm not sure.
Yes, absolutely. So in the UK, we do something called A levels. As it happens, when I did my A levels, it was the very last year of A levels. The year after I did all of that, they then changed it and you did something called AS levels.
Okay.
But actually, up until I went to business school, I'd always been very good at the sciences. I was great at chemistry, biology, physics, and my teachers, for sure, they thought I was going off to be a doctor or a researcher or a chemist or something like that. And then literally at the last minute, when I started to apply for universities, I don't know how this happened, but I just got bored with science. In chemistry, when you do a chemistry A level, you're forever working out formulas and you're making models of atoms and all of this kind of thing. And that just became tiresome. And from being very young, I'd always had this real interest in business and entrepreneurship. I'd always been super interested in that from being very, very young. And
you know why? Was it was it your family were in business, or what was it about that? Is the best?
No, not at all. I think growing up, I'd always watched a lot of business shows on TV. Both of us went on to be on The Apprentice with Lord Sugar. When Lord Sugar was younger, I was always so fascinated by business people like Lord Sugar who appeared in the news and the media. I was always fascinated by anything, any shows to do with business. So in the UK, and this is going back a long, long time, I used to like watching the Money Programme. There was a program on BBC about failing businesses called Trouble at the Top. And I remember that, and I used to love watching that show. And somehow, yeah, all that exposure to shows. And I think being young, when you're a teenager, a lot of people are obsessed with buying things. I became quite obsessed with brands. I was so fascinated by brands like Apple and Nike and other companies. I was so fascinated about the way they used creativity and design to create something magical, something, they captured people's imaginations and they created a global name for themselves. And that's what led me down that path to want to study business and management.
And so your family, I presume at the time, thought you were going on this scientific route, and were they just supportive of whatever you did, or were they kind of like, look, Alex, you're great at sciences, you should really go be a doctor, and that's a greater kind of better profession for you than maybe going to business? Or how was that like at that point? Yeah,
that's a good question. So I have friends where the parents really drove the kids mad from a very young age. They instilled in them, you need to go and be, you need to have a profession. You need to go off and be a doctor or a dentist, or you're going to be a lawyer, or you need to go into banking. My parents took a very hands-off approach. They never told me to go in any which way. I think, they always told me about the importance of education. They were very keen that I go and do a degree and study something, but they never tried to push me in any particular direction. So actually, I kind of reached that decision on my own without pressure. I just sort of did what felt right.
Okay, so then you go to Manchester Business School, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, business school was a really interesting experience. So actually, I started at a place called UMIST, which at the time, it was separate from Manchester University. So UMIST stood for University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology. So it was a completely different university. But in my third year there, it joined with Manchester Uni. I think it made, what's the word? it made the world closer to me because it was my first experience with lots of people from around the world. My course was very international. On my course, you know, there were people from all over the world. I started making friends from China, from Greece, from Italy, from the Emirates. There was somebody, one of my good friends was from Pakistan. One of them was from Lebanon. So in a way, it was fascinating because for the, you know, I'd grown up in a bubble. You know, I grew up in a bubble essentially. And it was the first time being exposed to lots of people from very different worlds, very different cultures. I also found my course very grueling and intensive. So at uni, I had friends who were doing courses that only required them to go to, I don't know, a few hours of lectures, and then they seemed to have all this free time. At my business school, the schedule was very full on, very intense. I struggled at times to keep up, and it stretched your brain in so many directions. It was mandatory to do maths and quantitative methods, statistics. We had to do modules and accounting. At the time, I hated all of that. I absolutely hated having to do all that stuff. It wasn't until a little bit further later down the line when I started to have to, you know, use some statistics and had to use some maths. So it was a blessing in disguise that they forced us to do what to me was all the boring stuff, but it was worth it. And yes, I believe, you know, you will have heard this many times, that you become the people that you surround yourself with. And I think because I was surrounded by these very ambitious, very international people at business school, I think that pushed me, and you know, it grew me as a person and probably shaped more of the person that I became.
So you mentioned that you weren't kind of at the time overly kind of happy with the enjoyed maybe the more maths-based side of it. We'll go into in a second. I'm sure your marketing kind of career, as a better phrase. Was that something? Did you hone in during that time that you really loved the kind of marketing aspect of business, or were there other aspects that kind of really took to your kind of fancy?
Yes, so that's interesting. So there's different types of people who work in marketing. There are people who are very data driven. Some people look at the world and they see numbers. The way they look at the world, it's just a series of calculations and numbers. I see the world qualitatively. When I look around, I see pictures, I see feelings, I see meaning. So in a way, my journey through business school confirmed that as a marketeer, I'm very good at the qualitative side of marketing, you know, strategy, positioning, brand building, helping companies define their meaning, their purpose, what they mean in this world. Yes, I do use data and I'm fluent with data, but I'm not a data, you know, I don't gravitate to that first. I gravitate towards creativity. So actually, yeah, even at business school, I realized very quickly that my love and my greatest skills was where creativity meets business. And that's why ultimately friends who were on the same course as me, the ones that were obsessed with statistics and data and the numerical side, a lot of them went on to do banking and, you know, more financially focused things.
I'm interested because you mentioned before that you're not a sort of person, very similar to me actually in this respect, that doesn't take well to kind of structure in a certain way and kind of maybe bureaucracy and those kind of things. Within university, of course, there's a lot of that goes on. How did you deal with that? Did you see it as a means to an end? Did you just see it as, well, I'm learning a lot of stuff here, like, or was it not as apparent to you at that point that you had a dislike to that?
At business school, I managed to succeed. I managed to succeed. Like most people, I managed to get through often by the seat of my pants. I'd be handing in my assignments literally on the second, you know, literally seconds before they were due in. I am very much a nighttime person. I not so much now. I kind of work during the day like most people, but at uni, I would often write my assignments through the night. I would read through the night. So I kind of became nocturnal, and it flipped my life upside down. So I found it very difficult to go to morning lectures. Even to this day, I'm not a morning person. That is something that has been consistent all the way through. So I just managed to get through, I just managed to sort of succeed, get through everything. No, the rules at university never really got in the way. Sometimes I might get a bad grade on an assignment, and sometimes I would get angry and I would push back and I would challenge. And sometimes, I was very good at entertaining people. There's people now who I speak to from university and they still remember the stupid things I used to say. I've always been a class clown, always. At high school, even at university, I would always like to join in. I would always like to contribute. And even now, even here in Israel, there's a friend who I went to business school with. And whenever I see him, he always brings that up. He's like, I can't believe you said this. I can't believe you said that. And I would, I'd have the whole lecture theatre, in complete laughter.
Do you have any examples of that?
Oh, well, this was funny, actually. We had a strategy lecture and we were shown a clip. We were shown a clip of a company, a lingerie brand, and it was a lingerie brand specializing in women, who were bigger up top, so to speak.
Yep.
And we watched this clip about this lingerie company, and they'd succeeded by targeting that market, not just trying to be all things to all people, yep, but specializing in what at the time they called the plus size market. So then after the video clip had finished, the lecturer said, well, can anyone tell me what was good about their strategy? So I put up my hand and I said, well, actually, I think what was key here is that they didn't take a one size fits all approach, which just made everybody laugh. So often, my humor is very dry. And even when I'm being serious, people just tend to laugh at me. Sash, for example, I work with him at BigChange. In my whole life, school, university, the workplace, for some reason, when I speak, people laugh at what I say, even when I'm trying to be serious. So yeah, that's something that has followed me forever.
So you graduate university, and did you have at that point a kind of an idea as to what you're trying to do, or what was the next kind of step for you?
Sure. You can have the very best laid plans in the world, but what happened next was just absolute pure coincidence. So my plan, my vision, my will was probably to join a creative environment. So I was really interested to join an advertising agency. That is somewhere I thought I can merge the worlds of business and creativity together. I thought that would be a perfect environment for me. But it's a very competitive world. I made lots of applications to ad agencies. I even did internships, but I never actually ultimately succeeded in getting those jobs. And my first real job, actually, interestingly enough, was with the founder of BigChange. Prior to BigChange, Martin Port had a business called Masternaut, and it was a very fast-growing technology business. They specialized in vehicle tracking systems. I didn't know Martin Port. I'd never heard of his business. I only crossed paths with Martin Port by complete coincidence. So literally, when I joined business school, I had a friend from Germany, from Frankfurt, a guy called Ben Yeager. And when I first met Ben told me he had this very eccentric uncle who had lived in New York, who was a larger-than-life character, who was an entrepreneur. And Ben said to me, my uncle started this business, he's in Leeds, and it's something to do with tracking vehicles. And I thought nothing more of it than that. So Ben told me, that was back in probably 2002 or 2003. Ben told me that his uncle had started the business. Then once I'd graduated and I was looking for work, unbeknown to me, Ben gave my number to his uncle. And one day, this Martin Port rings me up completely out of the blue. I could barely hear him because he had young kids and they were screaming, and Martin was there trying to tell me about himself. And all I could hear, were his kids like screaming and running all over the place. So I had this quick conversation with Martin, half understood what he was trying to tell me. And he just told me, come and see me tomorrow in Leeds. And that's exactly what I did. And Martin turned out to be this very interesting, bonkers at the same time, very eccentric, very dynamic, really interesting guy. And he offered me a job on the spot. He was the kind of guy, he didn't do formalities. It wasn't, make an application, write to the HR department. We'll get back to you. We'll invite you for a second interview. I quickly realized Martin was the sort of person where if he wanted you, he'd just say, right, we're giving you a job. Andrew, write Alex an offer letter. They would do it. It would all happen. And, within 2 hours, you got the job and it was all confirmed in writing. So I learned a lot from working with Martin. So your question was, what happened next? So I ended up meeting Martin by complete chance, completely through my friend Ben, who I went to business school with. And I ended up working with Martin and his wife for over 10 years across 2 of their businesses. So, they had a great track record in founding and growing businesses.
When you joined Masternaut, what kind of position was it in? How big a business was it? And where did it kind of get to when you left the business? And what did you do with it as well?
Sure. So I joined Masternaut in the marketing team. I joined really as a marketing manager, but I got promoted very, very quickly. So by the time I left, I was sort of head of communications. That business was already motoring very quickly. By the time I joined, they were already one of the fastest growing tech businesses in the UK. So they don't have this anymore. So in the UK, there was something called the Tech Track 100. I heard recently that they're not doing Tech Track 100 anymore, but historically, the Tech Track 100 was like the de facto way to rank the fastest growing tech businesses in the UK. So by the time I joined Masternaut, they'd already been in the Tech Track maybe twice. So I joined and they probably had, just over 100 people. But by the time I left, I think there was about 200 people there. So I joined in April 2007 and I left in around June 2010.
Okay.
And that was an incredible place to learn firsthand, work directly with a very dynamic, very ambitious entrepreneur. And in a way, it was a priceless experience because sometimes in a company, you're far removed from the owner and the founder. In that, right from the off, I was working with the founder and CEO daily, day after day. And that was probably a life-changing experience.
So you do spend some time there, and did it kind of further your ambition in the creative sense? You kind of as head of communications, what are you actually doing? I guess like day to day, what does that look like?
So my role was a lot of it was media relations. A big part of the strategy was communicating and really building the Masternaut brand. So I spent a lot of time really building customer case studies, building great stories that would be consumed by the media. So I would build relationships with the media in all the different sectors that Masternaut served. They had clients in the transport industry, construction, engineering, a whole host of industries. And my responsibility was really to make sure there was a constant stream of great news, great content, great case studies, so that Masternaut was being featured and mentioned in the media frequently it was also about building Martin's profile, making sure that we won all the right awards, that we were seen in the right places. And I also worked with other teams. So part of my responsibility was helping to organize the shows, the exhibitions, writing all the internal communications, all the emails that went out to current customers, prospects, etc., etc.
So, am I right in thinking that was the same year that you appeared on The Apprentice after you left Masson? Was that the next thing that happened?
It was. So you're right. My experiences at Masternaut were very much what got me the role on The Apprentice, because when I auditioned for The Apprentice, they were very fascinated by the experiences I'd had working with Martin. And I'm convinced it was that actually got me on the show. So you're right in between, that's when I did The Apprentice. And that was actually, it was somebody at Masternaut, one of my colleagues was an avid fan of the show, absolutely was obsessed with Lord Sugar, obsessed with Nick and Margaret. Margaret was still there at the time. And it was a friend, a guy called Daniel, who I worked with at Masternaut, and he used to pester me every single day. He said, Alex, I want you to apply to be on The Apprentice. I want you to do it. I think you're going to be great. You're going to make people laugh. You are perfect. And it was only through his tenacity in, reminding me almost every single day, I want you to apply. And it was the very last day when they were going to stop taking applications, when he actually came over to my desk, sat down next to me, and practically forced me to apply there and then. And that's how I ended up on the show.
So I was going to ask you why you went on the show. It was really due to someone else kind of just like pestering you and going.
Absolutely. I mean, that completely went down in history. I will say, from the very beginning, I always loved The Apprentice. I always watched it, but I never intended to apply, never in a million years. So I owe The Apprentice and all the trimmings that came with it to Daniel, because if he hadn't have been so adamant, I would never have done it. So yes, right. He changed my life, forever.
Wow. And how did you find The Apprentice yourself? The process, the afterwards.
Sure. Absolutely. I will say that there's few experiences in my life that have come close to the thrill and the excitement of being involved with the show. It was an incredible experience from beginning to end. It was an incredible experience. And I couldn't believe it. When the series editor rang me to say, you've made it, you're on the show, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that I'd been chosen out of all of these thousands of people, to be on the show. So it was bonkers. I think the thing I took away from being involved is it's amazing how The Apprentice is on at the moment, for example, and people make such a laughingstock of the candidates. And what people don't really realize is that reality TV in general, there's not much reality in reality TV. These shows are produced down to the finest detail. These shows are not run by business people. The Apprentice, it's made by TV producers. They've got a very sort of set agenda. And, having watched the show for many years even since I was on it, it's clear that the show is there to be entertainment. It's there to make people laugh. It's there to thrill people. The Apprentice is not about watching a bunch of really clever people doing really clever things. It's there, it's all about creating thrills. It's all about creating laughter. It's all about creating jeopardy. And that is what it's all about. And I think, we're insiders because we've been through the whole process. I think of course, I'm not criticizing the show. It's there to serve a purpose. It's there to make people laugh. but actually it is funny to watch it. It is funny to watch it, and it's funny to watch people's reaction, because they truly think that the candidates are idiots. They don't realize that really the candidates are puppets on a string and are railroaded in a certain direction. So a perfect example, the week I got fired, we were tasked to create from scratch a cleaning product. And we created a product called Germinator, and the opposing team, they created a product called OptiClean. Now, we sat in one of the top advertising agencies in London at their head office. There was one of their top designers working on the bottle design. What that person produced was just horrific, like absolutely horrific. Now, even a junior designer at university couldn't possibly have created such a bad piece of packaging design. So the only real answer, the only true answer, is that that was done on purpose. That person had been given a very specific brief by the producer to fuck it up, you know, to make a mess. That, you know what I mean? That designer couldn't possibly have created something so bad. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a job in that ad agency. So that, you know, that was pure sabotage, pure and simple. And I understand it. I understand why it was sabotage, because we ended up with a terrible pack. And that then gave, you know, Lord Sugar the ammunition to dig into us the next day. So yeah.
When you watched it back, and I'm sure you had, like I did, kind of people recognizing the streets and all that, did you have any resentment to how you came across? Did you think, you know, you were painted in a way that was unfair to yourself, or you were quite comfortable with the way you kind of the jeopardy and all the rest of it came across?
Sure. I was very lucky. I was very lucky. What I realized with the show is that if the producers liked you, if the series editor and the TV producers actually loved you and liked you as a person, they would project you in a very nice way. So with me, I think, you know, different people on the show play different character roles. With me, they definitely picked up on the comedy, and they projected that side of me, and they projected me in a very nice, endearing way. Some of the other candidates on my series, they were made to look like fools. They were made out to be stupid. The editors really somehow took a disliking to them and made it their business to completely discredit that person. I was very lucky in that never happened to me. Whilst at times the producers made me look a little bit silly, you know, they never made me look foolish or stupid.
And how did you find or cope with kind of the instant kind of being recognized everywhere? How was that for you?
For me, that was magical. To me, it was just magic, and it gave me a taste of what fame, you know, what real fame must be like. Literally, the morning after the first episode, you know, I went to the supermarket. Literally, it was only a few hours since the first episode had been on, and instantly people knew who I was. They knew my name. I noticed that people were taking photos of me. People were watching and staring, and people whispering and pointing. And actually, I lapped it up. I lapped that up. I loved being famous. I loved being recognized. I loved having photos with people. So in my case, it was magical. It was a magical experience, because I like talking to strangers. I love meeting new people, and being a known character just made those chance meetings and those chance conversations with people easier and more frequent.
And from after the show, what was your kind of, well, actually in your year, my year was still when there was a job up for grabs, right? That was
Mine was the very last year. That's right. It was the very last year when there was a job on offer. That's right.
Right. So I was going to say, what was your business plan, but you didn't have one at that point. But so you go on the Apprentice, and once you've got all this recognition and fame, people know who you are. did you parlay that into your next thing you did, or how did you kind of get into which is concoction, right? That's the next thing that happened.
That's right. So the truth of the matter is, being on The Apprentice, it closed as many doors as it opened. So, it closed many doors. A lot of people, see The Apprentice as a bit of a joke. So it meant that a lot of mainstream employment, wasn't possible. However, The Apprentice and the knowledge of me being on The Apprentice, it opened up many doors, and it enabled me to get a lot of meetings that I might not ordinarily be able to get. So it was just after The Apprentice that I had the idea for concoction, for the customized hair care system. And yes, that is what I pursued. And that took up really the next sort of 3 years of my life in terms of getting investment, preparing that, doing the product development. It was a very interesting time. And the Apprentice, almost prepared me for that in that, like I say, it opened up many doors, and it gave me some kind of profile in which to pitch for investment, etc.
What was concoction, and how did you come up with the idea?
So, very good question. I think what I saw, what I tried to do in hindsight was overly ambitious. The hair care market is very, very competitive. It's really controlled by a handful of global, giants. So I was probably very brave to try and take on that market. The idea came because, when you walk into a branch of Boots or a supermarket, the consumer is just bombarded. If you go down the shampoo aisle in a supermarket or in Boots, there are hundreds and hundreds of choices. And I thought, very early doors, I thought that the future of beauty was about customization and personalization. And that is true. Now we're in, 2022, that's where the market is going. So the hunch and the gap I saw in the market was correct. I just didn't raise enough money.
How much did you raise?
Sorry?
How much did you raise?
Well, I managed to get about 50,000 pounds in investment, which wasn't even close to being enough to really do something like that properly. Since I did what I did, I've seen startups in the US do a very similar concept to what I did, but their seed capital was, $2-3 million.
Yep.
So yeah, I think if I would have had access to real investment, then the story, could have been very different.
So what was it literally what would a customer, you managed to get into Selfridges, right? Which is, again, amazing.
Sure. So the concept was all about, we called it the technology of mixology. And it was a hair care system where you could customize your own personal blend. You could choose what we call a base mix, and those would come with different fragrances. You could then, like a cocktail, you could add different shots, and you could add multiple different benefits into the base blend. So for example, if your hair was frizzy, you could add an anti-frizz serum. If your hair was very dry, we had a moisture booster. We had all different shots for targeting all different needs. And the idea was, it was all about cocktailing. It was all about choosing the scent, adding the benefits that you need, and then being able to shake it up in the bottle.
And so what would like a price of a bottle be compared to like a brand you'd find in a supermarket?
Sure. So, we position this for the sort of more premium end of the market. So the products, it wasn't really competing with products you would buy in the supermarket. It was more competing with the sort of products you would buy in a salon. Okay. So we're talking about, let me think, it was about £10, just over 10 or 11 pounds for a fully finished customized bottle of the shampoo. And there was also a range of conditioners that went with it as well.
So you managed to you had some success in the United States with the product, right?
That's right. So interestingly enough, even the big haircare companies were very interested in what we were doing. So in the end, there was quite a big beauty company in the US. They were very interested in the brand and the concept. They loved everything, the branding and the packaging and the whole concept they loved. So they actually licensed, they took a license and they started bottling and producing the product in the US. And they got it into two very large retailers in the US who it literally ended up in thousands of stores. It wasn't a happy ending in the end because ultimately these stores have got very high sales expectations, so it didn't quite hit the sort of target sales level that was needed to keep it on the shelves long term. But absolutely, it was a very interesting achievement, to get the product into the US.
And then, if I'm not mistaken, your next after that, you then team back up with Martin Port, his new business, BigChange. Is that what happened?
Yes, that's right. So I got back in touch with Martin, and at the same time, he was planning to start a new venture, which became BigChange. And I worked with Martin even from the very early point, really helping him to create the go-to-market strategy, the marketing strategy. I worked with him on the branding, the naming, the positioning, building out all the collateral and all the materials, really getting everything ready for launch. So no, it was very exciting to work on that, from the very beginning. And it was nice to see that last year, Martin and the other shareholders sold the business for £100 million, a lot of money.
So I'm interested, how did you find the transition going from running your own business, being your own boss effectively, and then going back into being employed? How did you find that?
It was tough. It was very tough, actually. I think when working for someone else is a very different experience. It didn't take long to adapt. It didn't take very long at all, really. It was a little bit frustrating, but I quickly got back into the swing of things. And also working in at the time, BigChange was small. It was an entrepreneurial startup. So even though I wasn't ultimately my own boss, it was still an opportunity to, to have a reasonable amount of freedom.
Yeah. So BigChange, a similar kind of strategy to Masternaut in terms of crafting the stories and winning a load of awards, and of course a very successful exit. And I know now it's also gone on to be even more successful. So what point in time did you decide that you wanted to leave there? Was there any reason as to why that happened?
Well, I decided to leave at the point that the business was bought, or received that huge round of investment. For me, even towards the end, the business was growing very quickly. More and more people joined. And I like the small culture. I like the culture where everyone knows everyone. And when you start to get to much more than, say, 200 employees, that culture starts to break down a little bit. Things become more structured. You lose some of that family feel. And I decided to leave at that point, to then explore, other opportunities in other startups.
Right. So I'm just interested to know, what point did you then move? What point in time do you move to Ecuador? Was that the next thing that the kind of?
It is. So actually, I moved to Ecuador a few months. I moved to Ecuador while I was still working at BigChange. I decided I'd never traveled in South America. I quite fancied the opportunity to really try life in somewhere completely different. I thought it would be great to learn a new language, and to learn a language, if you're surrounded by English people and you're talking English all the time, you're not really going to learn it. So it was a chance to immerse myself in somewhere completely different. And it was interesting because I arrived there just as COVID was starting. That's when I arrived there. So whilst I originally planned to be there for a year, ultimately I was there for 2 years.
Why did you choose Ecuador?
So I had some friends who lived in Ecuador already, so I had some connections. Ecuador is a reasonably small country. Its economy is more sophisticated. It's not the biggest economy in the area, but compared to some places, it's well developed. And it just seemed like a really interesting place. And being a small country, it's got a mix of everything. In Ecuador, you've got great beaches, you've got parts of the Amazon rainforest, you've got mountains, volcanoes. So it seemed to offer a lot, in a very sort of compact country.
And so is that what you spent? You spent some time working at BigChange, and the rest of the time were you literally you're not actually working, you were actually just exploring?
I was. So after leaving BigChange, I decided to set up my own small consultancy. So since I left BigChange, I've been working on marketing strategy with a range, with quite a few smaller technology businesses. And that's what I'm still doing now.
So you do that in Ecuador, and then you've just recently, as you were saying before we start recording, you're now literally as of 2 weeks ago, you're now in Israel, right?
Yes, absolutely. So before I moved to Ecuador, I had moved here to Israel, but then I went off. So it was always my plan to come back. I just took an extended stay in Ecuador.
And how's the culture in Ecuador? Kind of, is it Spanish they speak then? I take it, or?
Yes, that's right. So I learned to speak Spanish. I would say I really enjoyed the culture in Ecuador. People are very friendly. The best way to describe it is in the UK, for example, you walk into a lift, people will avoid eye contact with you. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, people will avoid eye contact with you. They'll look at the ceiling, they'll look at the floor, that they'll do anything they can to avoid, any type of, human contact. In Ecuador, it's the opposite. You walk into a lift, people will say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So yeah, it was a lot easier to make friendships, and there's a very warm, open culture there.
And so I think my final question is, so now you're in Israel. I actually have 2 questions. One which is reminding me. So you've spent a lot of time with Martin Paul, who's a very successful entrepreneur within Mastodon and BigChange, 2 great businesses that have exited or done very well. What did you find there was the kind of why is he successful? Why is business successful? What are the cornerstones of principles that you found there that kind of really you think make the difference?
There was many things. Martin is a clever guy. He's got a great vision. He's got a great knack for building strong teams and fitting together people with very complementing skills. Martin is ambitious. And I think one of the things that holds people back in general is fear. And I think Martin is one of these people who's very brave, not afraid to fail. The truth is that as an entrepreneur, most things 80% of what you do will fail and 20% will succeed. And Martin had an ability to, overcome the knockbacks and failures that are, part and parcel of running a new business. Martin also worked very long hours and worked very hard. So, he probably packed twice as many working hours into a day than the average person. So those are just some of the things, that made him succeed.
Yep. And now my final question, I suppose, is now you're in Israel. What's the new focus? Where are you trying to take your life? What's the plan?
Yeah, sure. There's a great startup culture here. There's a huge amount of investment in technology ventures here. I think initially I'd like to join an existing venture and have the experience of working in an Israeli startup and really see how, that's different from working in a UK startup. So yes, I'm not ready to start something new yet of my own, But I think, you know, if I can bring some of my lessons and experiences to a company here, you know, that will make for an interesting experience.
Great. Well, listen, it's been really interesting to kind of hear your story and different things that have happened to you. And really thank you for your time.
Okay. No more questions?
No, we're all good. We're all good.
Okay. All right. Well, nice to chat and take care.
Thanks, Alex.